Hello and welcome to this new terrain breakdown. This terrain started out as an experiment. I wanted to see if I could create a realistic looking terrain starting out with an almost nonsense basic shape. This is the final result. I called it Desolated Lands. I think the name fits well. Let's see how I made it. I started out with a constant node, very simple, nothing fancy here. I then connected a displace node to add details to my plane. Now you could use the purlin, this is completely fine. However, the purlin usually creates a lot of curves along the border edges of your terrain. And I don't really want that. I want a quite flat terrain, however with details that looks like rocks. So the combination of constant and displace is perfect for this. I simply change the strength. I choose the method vertical, so the details goes along the z-axis, and this is it basically. After that, I connected the cells node. And now we have this Minecraft looking terrain. The cells, if you never used it before, it creates cubes and blocks on your terrain. The lower the scale, the higher the amount of cubes, but they also become smaller. The higher the scale value, the less cubes you will have on the terrain, and they will be bigger. I then use the blur node because the cells is very sharp and creates artifacts. So blur node set to a low value like 0.2 is nice to have as a follow-up. And then to give it a surreal look, I used the warp node. The warp creates displacement as well as curves along your terrain using the existing geometry. I change the size to roughly 50%, is 47 here, so it's not that strong. It is affecting a larger area of our terrain. I bump up the strength, and I think this is all. You can change the seed if you want another shape. And then I simply use the erosion to have a first pass of details. I believe that I used the hard erosion preset or the slope bias, I don't remember. I think it was the hard erosion. After that, I connected another warp, and now things get interesting. We have this very sharp but also nice result. I really like the surreal features. To achieve this, I use 2 iterations. The more the iterations, the higher the effect on your terrain. You will have a lot of shapes, but be careful because it will also create artifacts. I bump up the size and the strength as well. For this one, I used a mask, a simple gradient node. As you can see here, set to linear, so it goes from bottom to a higher value. Scale to 2. If you change the scale, the height will be different from left to right. In this case, the warp will have less strength, and on the right here it will have 100% strength. That's why if you take a look here, now this will be the bottom part of our gradient mask. The warp is less effective, and if you take a closer look here, you can see that we still have those erosion features that we had before. While on the other hand, here we have way more details produced by the warp. As you can see these spikes here. After this, I connected a wall that affects only this left part of the terrain here, as you can see, because I use the gradient to mask everything. I use the radial type. Default scale, however, I change the position to the top left corner and connect it to the mask of my wall. So we have only the walls here on the top left. I change some settings like 18 walls and the power to 0.3, so it's not that strong, but I also have a bunch of walls. I then use the aperture because the walls produce artifacts and sharp spikes, so apertures help with that. For the aperture, I particularly always use the spread method and octagon kernel, which is the shape of the filter. And this helps to fix the artifact. If one iteration is not enough, you can always choose 2 or 3, but be careful because it will also destroy your details. After that, I use a combine node with my previous warp, set to min method 100%. We have this kind of result here. Then I connected the shatter node to do some distraction. Shatter is perfect for this because it will create a lot of soils as well as cracks on your mountains and rocks formations. I use the default settings. Then another erosion node, this will be the last pass, set to slope bias 85. And now we have this very nice result. I then use the alluvium. It's very nice to create ancient landscapes because, as you can see, this is without the alluvium. This is with the alluvium. Default settings settling to 7, which means we have a lot of sedimentations. And finally, a surface node set to rocky to simply have a lot of rocks scattered around the terrain. 50% of strength, so the rocks are not so sharp, and this is it for our shape graph. Now, talking about the texturing process, for the data maps or the masks, we have the texture node, the soil node, the flow node, and the rock map. Now let's start from the texture. Default settings. These are the 2 setmaps that will define the general look of the terrain. I wanted a rocky looks. However, it shouldn't be so cheerful and colorful because I wanted a desolated land, almost dark fantasy. So I chose the gradient number 19 mixed with a more sandy looking gradient. Using the max method 100%, we retain the brightest spots on our set maps. After that, I choose, let's say, a surreal set map because it's purple with some brown colors scattered around. I mixed it using the blend method, and as a mask, I used my soil, as you can clearly see, graded, power of 10, which is the default, and it will only affect the white areas, as you can see here. Now this is after, this is before, so that purple color will give us that sci-fi looking terrain that we want. And after that, another mixer, the one connected to the flow as a mask. Now, for this one, I choose a bright set map, this one with blue and white colors, as a mask, as I said before, the flow, set to secondary flows, and this is the final result using the method divide, which divide the colors between them. So we have a very bright result, as you can see. This dirt looks really well. It breaks the shape of our terrain, so we have more contrast. This is before. Now this looks quite good. However, it's a bit boring, right? So we use the flow to break everything. And finally, the final mixer node, I used a rocky gradient with very bright spots. I also used the rock map as a mask. As you can see here, I inverted it, so we have the rocks themselves as the white areas that will be affected. And because they are too sharp and looks like squares, I use the blur node set to a minimum power, and this is the result using our mixer. And finally, some color correction. And there we go. I change the contrast, some hue, saturation, and our lightness. Equalization just a tiny bit to avoid any possible RGB artifacts. I didn't notice any, even without it, but I put it just in case. So this is our final result. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this little breakdown. If it's the case, leave a like to support the channel, subscribe to stay up to date with the latest contents. If you have any question, comment below, and I'll see you in the next one. Eyes in the sky, gazing far into the night. I raise my hand to the fire, but it's no use, 'cause you can't stop it from shining through. It's true, baby, let the light